Good evening and welcome once again to Channel 514, where we are continuing our series exploring ancient literature, and we will be doing so by, as promised, beginning to discuss Homer's Odyssey. Now, before doing this, I'd also like to specially greet and thank all of our viewers, and especially those viewing for the first time, and to urge everyone to check out our recent animated video, Secret Meetings at the Castle. And the reason why I say so, and the reason why I featured this video that I made on goanimate.com, is that that will be the forum through which I hope that viewers will submit questions or suggestions for future videos, which we will then address either here in the usual setting or another setting, or at the castle in our animated setting. But in any case, there are a few suggestions already that I'll be getting to by and by, but as promised, we will get into the Odyssey tonight. So I think probably we'll only discuss Book 1, and before doing that, I'll just make some general points about the text. Now, in our presentations on the Iliad, of course, I broke it up into 3 or 4 videos, and probably this time I will try to have only 3. I'll try to do this introductory one and then get through the rest of the poem in 2 videos. Now, I looked up Iliad on YouTube while I was making those videos and found no less than 48,500 hits, so if and when I look up Odyssey, I have no idea how many hits I'll get. But again, I hope you don't mind having just one more option and just one more hit if you yourself should search for the word Odyssey. But let's make a few basic points about the poem. Now, as we mentioned in a previous video where we were discussing Homer, some think, or there are two possibilities about the identity of the poet and the provenance of these 2 epic poems, the Iliad and the Odyssey. Or at least, for my money, there are 2 possibilities. Either they are the work of a single poet, or each one is written by one different author. So either there is one Homer or there are 2 Homers. Either one the author of the Iliad and the Odyssey, or one the author of the Iliad and the other the author of the Odyssey. So that again is my view on this subject. Others, I'm sure, will want to go farther than that, or break Homer up into many Homers. Although I'm not aware of any very distinct documentary hypothesis about Homer. Now, anyway, let's see where to go from there. Now, most likely, or the general consensus is that the poem was probably composed in the 8th century BC, or not much earlier, or not much later. And if I'm not mistaken, it will have been written down in the early 6th century BC. Or actually, I'm thinking of the late 6th century BC. And I have it firmly fixed in my mind that the Iliad is supposed to have been first written down at that time, so I'm assuming that we have the same idea about the Odyssey, but that is something I could perhaps have chased down if I took any time to prepare for these videos and in our series Exploring Ancient Literature. But generally I don't. I just mark a few pages in whatever book I'm using, either for the text on those pages or for the pictures on those pages, and then I launch right into it. So here we are, well launched and well on our way. Now, what else can we say about this? Well, let's talk about some misconceptions or some stereotyped notions or common understandings of what the Odyssey is about. So often it's thought to be about the journeys or the adventures of Odysseus, the king of Ithaca, on his way home from the Trojan War to his island kingdom. And, of course, he has a difficult time and he passes 10 years on his journey. But if you've read the Odyssey, you know that only 4 or 5 books, I think 4, are actually about his seafaring adventures, and the rest of these books, out of the 24, take place either on the island of Ithaca or they take place in other places where Odysseus finds himself, such as the island of Phaeacia, which is believed to be modern-day Corfu. Now, let's see. That's one misconception. And so that's the source of the term Odyssey, in the sense of I went on a real Odyssey today because I went to this place and then I went to that place. You know, I had an exciting journey with lots of adventure. So an Odyssey, a great journey. That's that understanding of the poem The Odyssey is where we get that idea and that expression. But of course, it doesn't really do justice to what our poem is about. Now, let's see if there are any other understandings of the poem that I'd like to mention before we get into this. Well, and one way of thinking of it, or one hermeneutic, or one modern sort of revisionist interpretation, is to look at the poem as being about how the women characters are oppressed because Penelope and the serving women are oppressed by the suitors or by Odysseus himself in Ithaca, or to look at it as a poem about how the suitors can't get a leg up in the world because this wicked king, Odysseus, is obsessed with his property or obsessed with regaining control of his kingdom, etc. But we will not be really talking about any revisionist understanding of the Odyssey as we go forward here. We'll instead, I hope, be looking at it as much as possible through the eyes and with the understanding of its author or of its intended audience, and trying to appreciate it for what it is on its face as much as we can. Now, we don't have magic powers to be able to do that in a perfect way, but anyway, one theme that I think stands out pretty strongly in the Odyssey is the proper order of things that ought to prevail in a human community. So, we have the island of Ithaca, and its king is away, and has been away for a long time. It is lost and presumed dead, and things have gone to rack and ruin on the island, and a sort of disorderly state prevails, in which the islanders themselves are set upon and oppressed and bedeviled, afflicted by the suitors, who are local nobility, either from the island or the nearby mainland. And I should mention that we don't know which Greek island is the ancient Ithaca, Homer's Ithaca. There are different islands that contend for that honor. But anyway, the suitors are from the island and from the mainland, and they're from the wealthy families from these areas, and because the king of the island is away, they're hoping that they can marry his wife, who is, of course, presumed to be his widow, because the king is presumed dead, and probably then dispossess his grown son and enjoy ruling the island and enjoy its wealth and its pleasures, etc. And so the suitors have sort of thrown things into disarray on the island of Ithaca, and so normal life cannot go on as the people feel that it should. So, for example, we see in, I believe, Book 2, but possibly Book 1, that the local men have not gathered together in an assembly to discuss their concerns in some time because the suitors don't call these meetings, and so it's just not practicable for the men of the island to assemble. But in their view, that should be something that should be going on regularly or frequently as needed. Now, also, of course, the suitors and their associates are plundering the wealth of the island, and they're also lording it over, tyrannizing the servants and retainers of the king, and we can guess the other islanders. Now, another thing that the suitors are doing is buying out or winning over the loyalties of some of the servants and retainers of the king and his family, and so you see that they have some of the herdsmen on their side, they have some of the domestic servants on their side, and as we find out in one of the later books of the text of the Odyssey, we also find out that one of the beggars is even on the suitor's side, and that although he's a bad beggar and he's sort of a ruffian, they've made him their favorite and their pet and their clown, at the expense of the other beggars who don't want to be around this ruffian. So, life is not as it should be in Ithaca. All is not well. And that connects us, or points us, I would say, to one of the most important themes of the text. And that, of course, has to do with right order and with the way a community ought to function, and certain ways in which it ought not to function, or certain dysfunctions that can take hold in a community when things are not as they should be, when there's a weak king, or when the king is away, or when there is an influx of interlopers who treat the community and the land as prey or as spoils. And so that is an important theme here, and I think that doesn't necessarily get overlooked so much in scholarship as in popular understandings of or popular appreciations of the Odyssey. So, of course, we all love the Cyclops, and we love the Sirens, and we love the two monsters at the Straits of Messina, and probably we like that the bad guys get what's coming to them at the end, but this whole point about life in Ithaca sort of escapes us, or it's not as popularly beloved. But anyway, that's one important theme. Now, another, I would say, is how a man deals with and, well, endures the hardships or the vicissitudes or the ups and downs or what have you of life. So Odysseus has adventures, and oftentimes, of course, he's shipwrecked or lost at sea or marooned on an island, etc., and oftentimes he escapes death very narrowly, and so in situations like this, he'll often get sort of philosophical with himself, or he'll do a little self-work, so to speak, saying to, do not break my heart, sort of coaching himself through all of these trials and tribulations. And that, I would say, is a pretty important theme in our story. And that is, of course, something that is pretty well appreciated on the popular level and the scholarly level, so everyone, of course, can appreciate that our main character is going through all kinds of difficulties, because we all go through difficulties. Now, let's see what else I might say about this. Well, as you would remember, if you've watched my videos on the Iliad, one of the themes in the Iliad that I tried to bring out more strongly than any other is that, as the invocation to the Muse at the very beginning of the poem has it, the will of Zeus was moving toward its end. The gods have an agenda. The gods, as I said, afflict man and bedevil his life. And that's something that you do see in the Odyssey to some extent, but I'm going to modify that understanding, or look at that theme from a different angle in these videos on the Odyssey, because while of course Odysseus in the Odyssey is afflicted by the sea god Poseidon, because in his adventure on the island of the Cyclops, he blinded the Cyclops, who turned out to be a son of Poseidon. So he's got that problem. He's got one god bedeviling him who really doesn't want him to get home. But once he gets home, and I'll remind us that we still have half the poem left to go once he gets home. So anyway, Poseidon's not involved anymore after that, because we're not at sea anymore. We're right there on a nice rocky island where we're safe from the sea. And let's see. So meanwhile, though, what we see more than the gods bedeviling Odysseus is the gods cutting him some slack. So, and I should point out that here and there in the Iliad, the gods do cut the characters some slack, but mainly they bedevil them. But anyway, here we have Athena as the special patroness of Odysseus. He is a special favorite of hers. And so, really, it's not so much a theme in our story that the gods can be nice sometimes, but that a man, they sort of help the one who helps himself, so to speak. So one can hope to get some help from the gods here and there, and one can hope to get some help from life here and there, even though it's full of difficulties. And so that's another theme in our story. And another thing that I'll point out especially is that part of the reason that the goddess Athena, who is associated with wisdom and cleverness and artisanship and war and heroism and the protection of the home and the city-state and the polity, so to speak, but one of the reasons why she favors Odysseus is, as she herself puts it, that he's a very canny fellow and he's always got a trick up his sleeve, he's always ready for the next exigency, and never really completely lets his guard down and exposes himself to the hazards of a new situation. So when she meets him at one point and he pretends to be someone else, then she's charmed by this. She basically says, that's why I like you, because you always have some story to cover yourself. And so that would be a theme in our story, this constant readiness for the next problem, or thinking ahead to what problem might be coming up next. Now, of course, we can point out easily enough that there are themes like loyalty to one's king, or the restoration of right order, and of kingly rule, and of the family, and family love, etc. So there's really a lot going on here, but I think I've hit on some of the ones that jump out at us. At least they jump out at me, and so these are themes that I'll be doing what I can to highlight in particular. Now, having gone on for about 20 minutes, I think I'll just save the actual discussion of the Odyssey book by book for future videos, and so hopefully we can get through it in two. I'll do books 1 to 12 and books 13 to 24, and that will probably do just fine, but let's see if there's anything else in particular that I'd like to mention here. Well, one thing is that there is a tradition that after Odysseus's return to Ithaca and his restoration of his rule there, he sort of once again desires to travel and go on a voyage, and so he does so and never returns. So he dies in his travels as a very old man. And this, of course, is mentioned in the Odyssey. It's foretold late in Odysseus' travels that this will be how he finishes his days. But this tradition is also found in Dante's Inferno, where Dante meets Odysseus, and I believe he meets Diomedes also, the wartime companion of Odysseus. He meets the two of them in one of the circles of hell, and they're enveloped in an undying flame. They're sort of living embers, and the character of Ulysses, the Latin for Odysseus, in Dante's Inferno, he then goes on about how he was so restless and he couldn't settle down and it was all for naught, etc. So you find that tradition there. It might also be mentioned in Virgil somewhere. I'd have to look that up, but Nikos Kazantzakis, the well-known modern Greek author who lived into, I believe, the 1950s, he wrote a narrative, or an epic poem of his own called The Odyssey, a Modern Sequel, so that would be Kazantzakis' Odyssey, that takes up this theme of Odysseus' later travels. So in this epic, Odysseus is at home after his great victory and his reconquest of Ithaca, and he finds that in his heart he's just not happy, that his son is too uninspired and businesslike a man, and that his wife is just worn away by time and is not the woman he loves anymore, and so he gathers together a band of islanders and goes off in search of new lands, and Kazantzakis has them discover Iceland, Thule in the Greek, so he has them have all these exciting adventures, and I think he has them discover iron and make, great contributions to humanity and things like that. But that is part of the tradition about Odysseus that comes down to us, but while it's mentioned in the Odyssey, it's not central to it. Now, just recently I was listening while in bed and falling asleep to a chapter in a work of G.K. Chesterton, and it probably was Heretics, although lately I've been listening to What's Wrong with the World, but somewhere he says that everyone thinks Odysseus or Ulysses, that he is this person who can't settle down, who loves to travel, etc., but really, to Chesterton's mind, he just wants to go home, so that's not what he's all about at all, traveling and having adventures, but there is that tradition that ultimately the travel bug, just continued to gnaw at him, and he had to put back out to sea, but that, having mentioned that, I think we've put paid to it, and we won't have to really deal with it again in these presentations. But 2 videos on the Odyssey coming at you, so thanks for joining us for this introduction, and we will be with you again soon. So a blessed feast of Our Lady of the Most Holy Rosary to you, to my co-religionists in any case, and have a great week to everyone else, and take care, and thanks very much for viewing, and we will be seeing you soon.